5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin, and on behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, I'd like to welcome you to our nonprofit empowerment webinar series. This is number 45. I hope that's a lucky number for you. And we have an outstanding guest, and I think a pretty catchy title, Access $68 trillion Wealth Transfer. He's going to get a fuller introduction in a moment, but I'd like to welcome to our learning community Patrick Schmitt, who is co-founder and co-CEO of Free Will. By the way, first, Patrick, how's your family doing?
Everyone's safe and well, and my parents, who are a couple weeks under 65, which has been frustrating to date, just scheduled their vaccine appointments this morning. So they will be.
Where are they? Are they in New York City?
They're in Rhode Island, so they've been riding out.
Okay. I'm going to decide it. Patrick is an amazing story. I want to go to some quick questions right off the bat. $68 trillion. I have a few thoughts. What does that look like?
Sure. I mean, I think it's sort of an unfathomable amount of money, and there are some representations of it. But if you took the entire GDP of the United States, and then you added the entire GDP of of China, which is in second place, and then Japan, and then India, and then Germany, and then the next 15 countries, and combine that, that's what $68 trillion looks like. And it's sort of an unfathomable amount of money.
Okay, I'm a trivia nut, so I did a little homework. As you see, how much it pays, $1 million a day. If you were to take that 68 trillion and make it into $100 bills, it would go around the earth twice. Now, we're hearing about the cost of the stimulus program. The national debt right now is $28 million, so it's more than double the national debt. Let's go to another question. I think when most people hear about planned and legacy gifts, they just think of rich people late in their life. Can you talk about, can donors from more modest means and at different ages be planned gift donors?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that we start calling these things estate planning. And a lot of people, the word estate means having a castle in Scotland. I don't have an estate, and so it's not me. But it's really anyone who has stuff needs to make an estate plan, including things like funeral instructions or who takes care of the goldfish or the kids. So this is really, really important. And what we're seeing is that increasingly, a lot more folks are taking this into their own hands. And so the range of legacy donors is from 18 to 88 and beyond. And so we're seeing a lot more folks take part in this and really enjoy being close to the organization for a long time.
Okay, here's another one of our bottom line questions right off. We talked about this amount that it's very hard to fathom, that the baby boomer, and I think Steve and I would claim that generation. I don't know about Patrice. Are you a baby boomer, Patrice? No, okay. I'm sorry, I insulted you. Well, with the baby boomers about to transfer $68 trillion over the next 25 years, if you're a nonprofit, what are sort of baby steps you can take to position yourself for that payday?
Yeah, well, there's about 3 dozen types of planned gifts, and that means that people get really intimidated. And so you can forget about 35 of them or about 34. And so this sort of simple bequest, which is a gift that someone writes into their will or trust, and the same way they would leave something to a son or a daughter or a friend, that's about 85% of all planned gifts. And so unless you're a college with a large endowment or a massive health system with a 20-person development team, you can actually just focus on bequests and really simplify it for yourself and your donors. And those are going to be the largest gifts. They're going to be the simplest gifts, and they're the gifts that you can take on and win in a relatively short time, because everyone needs to do their estate planning anyway. And so they're really advantageous for you.
Okay, Patrick, will you take a really, really challenging question? Okay, tell us about Free Will.
Yeah, so I love getting to work at Free Will. So Free Will is about 90 people, designers, engineers, lawyers, a lot of fundraising experts. And what we do is we make some of the hard, sort of more complicated types of gifts really easy and really accessible. So we've raised about $2.5 billion in new plan gifts and bequests, and also millions and millions in new stock gifts, which are basically the best way to give for most people, and yet can be intimidating. And same thing with QCDs, which are gifts out of an IRA. And so our work is, there's a bunch of really, really important gifts that can be 1,000 times larger than the other gifts. And they can be intimidating, but we make them easy and accessible, not just for donors who really appreciate it, but also for nonprofits. So.
Okay, this is a two-part question.
Sure.
Ready? Who is buried in Grant's tomb, and is free will totally free?
Free will is totally free, and I believe that Grant and his wife, is that correct, are buried in Grant's tomb.
Right. Okay, let's move to two members of our learning community. Patrick and I have been talking, and these are some of our learning objectives. But I'd like to bring on two members of their learning community. I think I've given them a whole 90 seconds to speak to two parts. Number one, to briefly give an update on the mission of their wonderful nonprofit, and also to share something they would like to know about planned giving at the end of this webinar that they don't know now. And I'll start with Steve Herlick, who's Vice President of Development at Morningside Ministries. And Steve is one of the more respected people in the San Antonio fundraising sector. Steve, it's great to have you as part of our learning community.
Well, thanks, Jim. That's mighty nice of you to say. Appreciate it. Yeah. As far as 45 seconds on Morningside, as you mentioned, we're a senior living organization, and I won't rattle off all the different levels of care and everything. I think the important thing for people to know is that quality of living is really everything here for older adults. Actually, quality of living for the residents and their family members and the caregivers who serve them. So everybody really is fully engaged in that. And that makes a difference. And Morningside's been creating that quality of living, that faith-based mission ministry for San Antonio older adults for 60 years. In fact, this year we're marking that anniversary. And you know what's special about it is that we sort of all support each other like a family does. And that makes it meaningful and rewarding and really an exciting place to be. I feel blessed to be here.
Well, thank you, Steve. And now let me welcome Patrice Gibson. It's because you're not a baby boomer that you're second in the order, but she is the Director of Development and Planned Giving for a nonprofit called Shining Hope Farms, which I think does the coolest things. Can you, two parts, talk about Shining Hope Farms, and then tell us what you'd like to learn about planned giving at the end of the hour that you don't know now.
Yes, thank you, Jim, and it's so fun to be here. I am the Director of Development and Planned Giving at Shining Hope, and we have 3 farms in and around Charlotte, North Carolina, and we provide physical, occupational, and speech therapies to children and adults with special needs. We also work with veterans and do therapeutic riding. We have an entire program for veterans, and we are working to broaden our mental health offerings as well. And so we're moving into the behavioral health space, not only to help with veterans, but also other people that need those services. So I'm excited to be here. I love Patrick. I have been on many of his webinars before, and
we have a fan club, Patrick.
Yes, I am absolutely a fan. And so while we are not a young organization, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary next year. We are new to planned giving, and that's part of why I was brought on, was to really grow that and build that out. And so I'm excited to learn kind of the roadmap of how do we get from just starting planned giving to really leveraging that 68 trillion and really starting to capitalize and be successful in going after it. The fundraiser in me wants to go after it right now and get it all.
Thank you. And thank you for being part of our learning community. And Steve and Patrice, let's see if Patrick and I can respond to your 2 questions. I wanted to point out this is part of our weekly webinar series. We're very excited about the topics and the speakers lined up for the next several months. We have them all scheduled. I want to make sure that you are all receiving the Stratagems newsletter. That will give you a monthly update on trends in philanthropy. Also, it will get you invited to these webinars. I wrote a book that was a whole 82 pages 2 years ago. It's called 10 Simple Fundraising Lessons. And I like particularly to put it in the hands of board members and non-practitioners, and to demystify the art and science of fundraising. We like to say, Patrick, that nonprofit executive directors are no strangers to stretching nickels into dimes. But now they have to stretch them into quarters. But the good news is that philanthropy is resilient. We don't have the books closed yet on 2020, but the fundraising effectiveness project indicated that over the first 9 months, fundraising was up 7.6%. Donor advised funds just have exploded. Fidelity alone distributed, I think, was $9.1 billion in grants. And then there's Wonder Woman, Mackenzie Scott, who gave out $6 billion. By the way, congratulations, Mackenzie Scott. She just got married to a Seattle science teacher. Congratulations to him, too. But there's no reason. The number one predictor of philanthropy, and nothing is close to number two, that is the stock market. And I believe Steve and Patrice, we set new stock market records just today. So, and one of the things we've learned when Steve and I started, you could only ask for gifts face to face. And we have plenty of evidence that virtual fundraising is working well. And there are 1.5 million nonprofits in the country, 100,000 in Texas, 6,000 in the San Antonio area. And we're all, the donor is not choosing between the good and the bad. They have to choose between the good and the good. And so we have to figure out what makes your nonprofit stand out. And ultimately our job is not complicated. That's to get the donor to know, like, and trust us. Most nonprofits aren't large. As you see here, 88% have budgets of $500,000 or less. And with that, I would like to ask everyone in our learning community to type in the chat space. This is our mantra, nonprofit strong. Patrick, what are we?
Nonprofit strong.
You're exactly right. Steve, what are we?
Nonprofit strong. I'm typing it now.
Patrice, what are we?
Nonprofit strong.
Before we go any further, Michael, is there any cue you need to give the other members of the learning community if they want to come on screen, either with their video or just the audio?
Sure. So I'll just explain what's different this week. So in the past, we've been running these as webinars through Zoom, and this week we're actually running it as a meeting instead. So all that means, all that's really different is when you join, you can already turn on your camera, and then if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and then kind of give Jim a cue, and then he'll ask you a question. So it should just be a little bit easier to see everyone and easier for people to ask questions in this format. So we're just going to try it out for a few weeks, and you can still type in the chat as well if you have any questions, but that's about all that's different this week.
Well, I'm going to move on to my Q&A with Patrick, and anytime if you have a question about a question, just type it in the chat space. Otherwise, we'd rather see your pretty face and come on screen. Patrick, are you ready to begin with the Q&A? Let's go. We've always say, we understand that something like 70% of adults don't have a will. Why is this number so incredibly high?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. I would say about half of Americans don't have a will, and then there's about another 20% where that will is 10, 15, 20 years old, and so borderline useless. There's really two things. One is that there's not actually a lot of people urging folks to get wills. And so it's not something you just sort of stumble across on a given Wednesday.
You want to know? I'm wondering, I never really thought of it. A family member? No. That would be a little self-serving. A professional? That might also be seen as self-serving. I interrupted you. Okay.
That's all right. I mean, we're seeing the number of trust and estate lawyers in the country go down, actually. Very few young college law school grads are going into T&E. In minority communities, there are even fewer trust and estate attorneys and little access to this for the most part. And so that's a big challenge. And we ran some research a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, and showed that a lot of kids have never talked, meaning adult children, have never talked to their parents about any of this. And so it's something that's sort of seen as inaccessible. Nobody really wants to talk about it. And whenever we interview donors, which we happen to do all the time, they always say things like, I'll do it next year, but I said that last year.
Yeah.
So pretty common.
You know, one of the major impacts of COVID-19 has bluntly made a lot of us come face to face with our own mortality. Have we seen some really significant increases in estate planning over 2020?
I think so. And we've certainly seen that sort of broadly. Things like Google searches for how to make a will or make a will online are about 50% higher than they've been in the history of Google searches. Wow. So we have 15, 20 years of data there, and that's off the charts. And then at Free Will, which helps a lot of people make their estate plans, this January might have been 5 times higher than last January as an approximation. And so people are just doing it more. Part of it's coronavirus. Part of it's, if you're retired, you're running out of things to do at home. So your checklist has gone so far down at this point. So people have more time and space, obviously a lot more time with close family members in terms of contact, even if not in person, and obviously some impetus here. So we've seen a huge shift, and hopefully it sort of continues as people become more comfortable about talking about these things.
Let's keep on that theme. Could you compare and contrast the demographics of people who have made wills with those who haven't made wills?
Sure. I mean, as you might imagine, the folks that have made wills skew older. They also skew more educated. Women tend to make wills much more than men.
Can you repeat that? That's
sure. Women make more estate plans than men by a pretty considerable degree. I think one of the risks of being a man is that we tend to think we're invincible, which rarely turns out to be true.
That's for
and so you see that to a pretty considerable degree. But in terms of folks that don't make wills, the shifts aren't as pronounced as you might think. So a ton of wealthy people, a ton of PhDs, a ton of older folks all don't have estate plans. And my co-founder Jenny and I, we met at Stanford and we did a lot of research. We interviewed a lot of folks, a lot of baby boomers there. And I remember, asking one older gentleman, 65, 70, 75, why haven't you made a will? He's like, gosh, it seems awfully complicated. And I was taking notes. I looked up and I thought, wait, aren't you a rocket scientist? And I, didn't want to figure it out, right? It's not like he couldn't, but he didn't really want to, and it wasn't easy enough to go through.
Yeah. Hey, forgive me if this is kind of like a why is there air question, but can you simply describe the difference between a well-constructed will and a poorly constructed will?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, a will that exists is a huge leap forward, period. And so a lot of what folks have is nothing, including Prince, and you guys might have heard that the founder of Zappos recently passed away, about $450 million, I think, in no will, which is not great. But a good will is specific. If you're giving away a car, you name what the car is. If you're giving away a house and you might have multiple properties, you name the address of the house. If it's divided among your grandchildren, is it children that are born, are already in existence at this date, or is it all future grandchildren? And so things like that, right? What you don't want to do is leave judgment calls up to your kids to haggle over or a court. And so specificity makes a really good will.
Yeah. To our nonprofit partners, to the extent they can influence an outcome, should they ask for their donor to designate a specific cash amount or a specific percentage of the estate in their will for the nonprofit?
Great question. It is always a percentage. You always want to ask for a percentage. Now, why is that? It's a little tough, right? Because you might think, oh, my goals are around, fixed numbers. What we see is that percentage gifts tend to be 6 or 7 times larger than cash gifts. And it's because people underestimate their net worth pretty considerably. And it's actually better all around, because in the rare case where an estate goes down in value, you don't, and the donor meant to leave you 10% and you take 80%, well, you're gonna have some issues with the children there, right? And so it's sort of a better thing for everybody if they say, look, 10% for your organization, 10% for another organization, 40% to each of 2 children, and that expands. And as Jim just mentioned, nothing sort of indicates nonprofit giving like the stock market, and a lot of the assets that these folks have are going to be going up pretty dramatically. And so you want to be along for that ride over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so that grows. Because otherwise you close a gift now and a little bit of inflation, et cetera, it's not quite the same. And so if that house in San Antonio goes up by a bunch, which it probably will, as some Californians move down to hang out with y'all, like we're going to have a different dynamic, and that wealth is going to grow overall.
That's right. We are welcoming big California money. Hey, are we seeing any major differences in the way that baby boomers are preparing their estates as opposed to their parents, the World War II generation?
Yeah, so there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that baby boomers are worse at it.
Are more what?
They do fewer plans than their parents. You might imagine that their parents who had lived through World War II are less skittish about talking about death at all.
Yeah.
And so boomers do fewer. The other thing we're seeing is that boomers are really shifting online, either to do the whole thing or just to get started and get their affairs in order before visiting an attorney. So boomers are sort of the first group that really doesn't like strangers, whereas it was sort of part of the small town existence of the previous generation. And that continues, by the way. Gen X is more online, fewer strangers. Millennials don't even want to pick up the phone. And so we're seeing a really big shift there. And folks, these are people who've been doing TurboTax for 15 years now and use Quicken before that. So they're used to this idea that you can professionalize via software and not just via the person down the street.
Before we check on questions for the audience, the overwhelming majority of legacy gifts is either charitable bequests, retirement plans, or life insurance policies. Can you take a moment to talk about each format? Bequests, first of all, and which is what, something like 90%?
Exactly. So I think if you're sort of structuring these in your own head, don't think of them as 3 co-equal things. Mm-hmm. Bequests are 85%. Beneficiaries might be another 12%. Life insurance might be 2%, and then everything else is 1%. And that's a little bit rough, but unless you are at an organization that has 4, 5, 6 plan giving folks, you might want to think only about those 3 and maybe even the first 2. So bequests, very simple. It is written into a will or trust. It can be a paragraph. It often has some specifics, but you hear about these most often. They tend to be the largest gifts. And if you're getting 20% of someone's whole net worth, it's usually in the form of a bequest. And so Patrice was mentioning earlier that she's getting her organization rolling with planned gifts. We're starting with bequests in that case. And maybe in 5 years, we're layering on some other things. The second, though, which might be the one other thing that Patrice would start with, is what are called beneficiary designations. And it's just a fancy way of saying, hey, there are some things that don't go in the will. How do we figure out who that goes to? And so, for instance, many of you are going to have a 401k or an IRA. Now, that has something called the transfer on death clause. And so it may go to your spouse, it may go to a child, it may go to a charity. It can also get divvied up. Now, what's the big appeal of something like that? Well, it's 2 things. One, it's pretty simple. If you log on to your payroll account or whatever sort of employee admin stuff you might have, you might be able to change your 401k designation in a few minutes. It's not that complicated. The second is, and we keep coming back to the stock market stuff, that the stock market's really growing. Now, what's in retirement accounts? Stocks. There's about $9 trillion in IRAs. So these gifts are getting bigger and bigger by the year. And then the third thing on beneficiary designations, and not all of them, but a 401k or an IRA in particular, is that money, if you're putting $20 or $200 or $2,000 this month into your 401k, that money's not getting taxed. And so the government says, look, when it comes out 20 years later, we're going to tax it. We didn't tax it the first time, so we're going to tax it. But if you're Steve and you're inheriting an IRA from your father, from your mother, from someone else who really cares about you, you're going to pay full income tax on that. So you might suddenly be paying 30, 35% taxes on that, even if that person's not above the estate tax threshold. And if you're in a place like California, you could be paying 50% because it's going to be you're going to be shrunk into a few years, so your income's going to be really high.
Hey, you led perfectly in the next question. You've already started talking about the tax advantages of making a charitable gift through your estate, particularly talk about bequests.
Sure. So this varies state by state. And most states do not have an estate tax. Now, some states do. Rhode Island is one. There are quite a few others. And anything above that is taxed at some rate. The federal estate tax kicks in on larger estates, but it's enormous. So if you're above, I think, 22 million for a couple right now, 21 million, excuse me, or 10.5 million for a single person, everything above that that gets inherited is taxed at 50%. It's this idea that you want to avoid sort of persistent generational wealth in the US. Now, there are certainly ways around it, which is why you have families like the Waltons and other folks like that. But it's just an enormous shift. And so that it's one of the things that makes bequests really beneficial, because the amount of money is otherwise half of it goes away to taxes. And so if you know folks, and there are probably a couple of your donors who are going to be in this category, not all of them, but a few, boy, those gifts can get really, really large, right? And you start, stop thinking about what they're diverting out of their paycheck and start thinking what 15% of their total net worth is, and that can carry an organization for a couple of years.
Patrick, I call this my low-hanging fruit. And this is part of the reason my hair is gray, part of the reason that Steve's hair is missing. How can nonprofit get donors to let them know they've included them in their wills? I can't tell how many times that's come up. Huge gifts. And the first thing, our development stuff, we're researching the donor who just left us 20 million or something.
I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's certainly a massive problem. So just to put this in context, in our research, we've seen that organizations typically know about 20 to 25% of bequests before they happen. Or another way to think about it is up to 80% you don't know about. Why is that a problem? Well, you obviously can't express your gratitude to someone during their lifetime. It's also likely that that person might want to give you a bigger gift sooner rather than later. But you don't talk to them, and you don't know that they've sort of made you almost part of their family. And so we tried to fix this on our own tools. And originally, about 40% of people were saying, yes, along with this gift, send my information to the nonprofit so we can chat. 40%, which is twice as good as the national average, but still pretty poor. And so we ran an experiment and failed. We ran another one and failed. We ran 6 more and failed. And then one of our staff, I think my colleague Jada, just suggested, well, what if we just ask them to be nicer to the nonprofit? And we put a little bit of language in that said, it's really helpful to nonprofit staff to know about these gifts in advance. And without knowing, they can't count them towards planned giving goals and it hurts planning. So can you let them know? And we're so reticent to talk about ourselves. We only want to talk about the mission, the organization, but from a human to human standpoint, just saying, look, it honestly makes my job a lot better to know if these things happen, because it's much easier on our whole team. So if that's in, just let us know. And people respond that way.
And I bet Steve and Patrice are that it doesn't hurt to have those cited in your performance reviews. But Patrice, first of all, before we go to the audience, and then we'll go to Steve, how are we done in responding to your question? We can sharpen it a little if you want.
Wonderful. No, this is great. This is perfect. Thank you.
Patrick and I made a deal. If there's a very difficult question, he takes it. If there's one that's easier than cake, I take it. Steve, how are we done in answering your question?
Well, Patrick's doing a great job.
I know that, but
you're okay. You're asking good ones.
Yeah. Let's go to our audience, and I could keep on going, but I won't. But do we have anybody in the audience that either would like to type a question in the chat space, or better yet, let us see your face?
Can we comment?
Yes. Who do we have?
Diana Hoyt.
Oh, hey, you came on very early. By the way, let's give you a commercial message. Do you want to give a 30-second infomercial about your nonprofit?
I am not with a nonprofit. I'm actually moving from working in a software company to being a professional consultant. But
Hey, you can plug in your consulting firm. We're pretty friendly here.
Well, I'm going to be brand new to this, and Jim, I actually was the person who had to check all of your references for APC.
Okay, I passed, so I want to thank you. So what's
You're
your,
welcome.
thank you,
Look,
Elaine, and what's your question?
Well,
For,
it's not a question, but I wanted to comment because
Yeah.
I do know the issue of getting donors to state that they have put you in the will as an issue. I'm familiar with an organization that what they do is once a year, they invite any donor who is interested in putting the organization in their will, to making a planned gift, to come, and they have like a coffee and dessert, and they have a legacy book. And those people come, they socialize, and they sign the legacy book stating that they're putting the organization in their will.
Yeah.
And so they make it a, it's like, it really, I think Patrick used the word family. So
Yeah.
it's creating that family of donors, and they're in the book, you know. So they make it fun and social, and that's just a nice way that any nonprofit could do. Is
I
just
like that.
invite them.
Elaine, thank you for being a member of our learning community. I have more questions, but is there anybody else in the audience who either would like to type their questions or come on screen or send a smoke signal? We're taking your questions from all different mediums.
Looks like Joel has a question.
Okay, is that Joel from the Metroplex?
Yes, this is Joel Batowski from Dallas, Texas. My question about wills is, should you discuss your will with your family members before you die?
Okay, I'm going to let Patrick take that.
Joel, 100%. And if the answer is possibly more and more, I mean,
No kidding.
you don't want surprises. You don't want people to misunderstand what your intentions are. You want to be super clear, and it will smooth out the process for everyone. I think it's.
How do you do it one-on-one, or you get the family together?
It's a good question. I would do it one-on-one, but it depends on the family dynamic. You know, Anna Karenina sort of comes into play here.
And
where,
Patrick, would you say it is probably the wisest way to head off family feuds, to let everyone know ahead of time it's going to be equal or 1/3 here or whatever?
100%. I think it's the kind thing to do, and you don't want, if someone's going to be upset with you, you'd rather be able to respond rather than sort of leave your side out of it. So yes, almost certainly, and we would advise anyone to do it.
Patrick, most of our nonprofits are small. We saw on the screen 88% of the 1.5 million nonprofits have budgets under $500,000 a year. So for a nonprofit that's lucky to have one development staff member, how much legacy plan giving expertise that they need to know to enter these conversations with their donors?
I think relatively little. I would not be intimidated out of this. You don't have to have all the answers. No one expects you to be an attorney. You know, a very simple pathway is, you know, I know that this type of impact, meaning the mission, is really important to you. And so I wanted to talk through a couple of different ways that other people are doing this, right? So you normalize it, you make it very comfortable. I was just talking to a donor last week, and in addition to giving out of their donor advised fund, she has also chosen to add us to their will. Is that something you'd like to hear more about? And then one other key thing here that's useful is we have folks from 18 years old to 88 leave gifts in their will, which is very important because you don't want a donor who's 85 to feel like you're really targeting them for being older. And so that type of language, which we've tested a bunch, works quite well in terms of really normalizing it and sort of having a fun conversation. Another just line that we've done a lot of testing on these, we often say, you know, even if you plan to live to 150, which is sort of a tease, you still need a will. So here are some resources to think about that. And helping people think that through can be quite useful without needing to get into specifics and say, you know, I want to have a couple local attorneys that you can just give the phone number, or tools like free will and all these other things. But you don't need to be in charge of the whole estate planning. You just know that this is a path to give. And one thing that's really important here is that if you're fundraising, you should know that a typical bequest, which we've been talking about, is about 3 times the size of someone's total lifetime charitable giving.
Wow. Repeat that again. Hey, repeat that again.
Sure. So if someone's given $25,000 in their whole life to all charities, they might be expected to leave a $75,000 bequest. So you're missing out on 3/4 of all giving if you don't, if you're not focused here. And so it's just so key. And we've already talked about how baby boomers are aging, and this is a moment. If you have older donors, if you're a religious organization, these are the types of gifts that will carry you through the next 2 decades.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, I had a question.
Okay, who's this?
This is Shay at M. Gill and Associates.
Hey, welcome, Shay, to our learning community. Please.
Thanks,
and again,
Jim.
if your question's difficult, it goes to Patrick. It's a piece of cake. I'll take it.
Well, I was actually introduced to free will through an organization that asked me to start one. I missed the beginning of y'all's call. I'm not sure if you covered that, but it got me really interested. I was already interested in creating a will and what would happen with my 401k when I got married and all of that. And so I feel like I'm on probably the younger end of the target, but I was really interested in it, and it was really neat that it came to me from an organization, and then I kind of saw it on LinkedIn and everything like that. Are you seeing good acquisition rates from people in the millennial range?
Yep, I'm glad that you got that out before Jim asked you if you were a baby boomer also. We have this sense where we're seeing a lot of folks do it. A lot of new parents, a lot of folks who just paid off their student loans and suddenly have positive integers of wealth, even if it's not a lot for the first time. And so that's a big shift. And I think one thing that people are beginning to understand is that you can make a will and then you can change it. And so you don't need to decide at 24 what's going to happen when you're 90. You decide at 24, what if something happens in the next year? And then you can always revisit it. And I think we try to make it a lot easier. And so we also see a lot of nonprofits basically share this as a service to their donors and to their supporters, and then people normally make it. And coming back to the conversation much earlier around why people don't have wills, it's because it's hard, or they perceive it to be hard. And so, we can team up with folks and try to make it easy. And that's been really nice because fundraising is really important, but so is helping everybody have these plans in place. And so we're lucky to have an elegant solution where we can solve one problem with another.
Let's talk about capital campaigns, where the point is to stretch giving capacity, okay? And you could have a current component and a deferred component. Can you talk about how planned gifts can be a significant part of capital campaigns?
Yeah, I think as we talked about before, they're a great addition if you've already locked in a big major gift, because that planned gift, while seeming smaller, might be 4 times larger, right? Especially if we're talking about percentage gifts over here. The other thing is that they're a good fallback, right? That as people are making really big commitments, it will be the case that some people just aren't in a position to do so. And they may have newfound health bills or a different family situation or something else. And so having this as an, okay, well, you can almost certainly afford this because it's not money you're going to need in your lifetime. Let's talk about another big component there. And so at that moment of stretching, you have 2 real options. Is it a +1 to the big gift, or does it replace the big gift of that person? Is keeps you from getting a no because there's a secondary option.
Yeah. Hey, can you take a moment to talk about the marketing of planned gifts, particularly for those smaller nonprofits that are resource challenged?
Sure. It's not, it's one of these things that is going to take repetition. So I would give yourself a challenge. How do we mention it 10 times this year? Doesn't have to be, it might be 1 or 2 emails about planned giving over the course of the year. And if you, we have a portion of our site that's just resources.freewill.com, and it's all sort of free email templates. If you don't know what to write, just take one, change a couple words, put in your organization, send it out. These are all pretty tested to be effective because we know not everyone's sort of a highly skilled writer around planned giving. So that's all free. But the other thing is you just want to present it as really 2 things are successful. One is if you have some resources, meaning a guide to estate planning or something like free will, you say, look, this is just a resource for you. We'd love for you to have it. It's really important. If you want to leave a gift, great. If not, it's still free, or we're still happy to help. And so that sort of service approach is really easy and really effective. The second is when you just talk about different types of giving, you want to include it. So it's not off-putting if planned giving is one of 4 types of things you're talking about. You might say, Steve, a lot of people are making different types of gifts this year. Can I tell you about 3 of them? You'd say, yes. I say, well, a lot of folks are making monthly gifts, as it helps, the predictability helps our organization plan. 2, people are making a lot of stock gifts because they can save on 2 types of taxes at the same time. And oftentimes more than half of the gift is what they're saving in taxes. And that's really exciting. And then 3rd, a lot of folks are actually choosing to write us into their will. And these are people that aren't going to, pass away for a really long time. But it's a way to show commitment to the organization. And it tends to be a really powerful gift. So, is there any of those 3, can I share more information on? Something like that.
Hey, when we talk about the nice tools that are available for free on the FreeWill site, if I'm a one-person shop, couldn't I get familiar with your website and together go take my donor there and kind of use your tools?
Sure. So as Jim mentioned, we have a totally free site. It's called freewill.com. People can use it to do their estate plans and put any charity at all. With sort of larger nonprofits, we create custom versions for them, and there's a bunch of added benefits there. But at its core, if you're a one-person shop and you're $1 million a year revenue, it probably doesn't make sense to pay us any money and spend invest there. Instead, use the free templates and send folks to the free tool, and it's a good process for you.
Patrick, everything is how you say it. What are your recommendations in talking about estate gifts?
Yeah, one is don't be, sometimes people start talking about estate plans and their voice drops and they suddenly get very it's just not how you want to do it. Say, look, we know that you love helping educate folks. We know that you love, treating people who have trauma, and we want to help you do it. So I want to guide you through a couple of options that's going to make you have the most impact on the thing you really care about. Let's talk through a few things. And that includes, not only should it include some non-planned giving stuff, like a donor advised fund, it should often include some non-monetary stuff, right? So change the conversation. You could start volunteering. We could talk about some volunteer opportunities. You could make this type of gift. You could make this type of gift. And actually including non-monetary things actually shifts the conversation as well.
Hey, I got to tell you, in briefing me for this webinar, you taught me 2 words that I really never used before. Could you talk about the importance of social proof?
Sure. So social proof is sort of the positive side of peer pressure, right? This idea that if all your friends are going to do it, you're going to feel a lot of pressure to do it. And also you'll feel more comfortable doing it. And so social proof is repeatedly seen in marketing, in all sorts of psychological behavior to have effect. And it's basically this conveyance that not only are other people doing it, but people like you are doing it. So if I said a lot of people who are currently in development offices at organizations between $1 and $3 million in revenue are doing this thing, you would probably be strongly considering doing it. And now this social proof is even more important in avenues where there's not a lot of other information. And so, for instance, if we were all in person right now, what you'd probably see, and we've all sort of gotten a little bit more casual in this, but a lot of the men would be wearing the same blue button-down shirt, right? And a lot of the women would be dressed similarly. And because we've sort of seen what other people do when we try to adapt to it. With estate planning, it's very rare to know what your friends or family are doing. It's not something you talk about at dinner parties.
Yeah.
And you in a fundraising role can say, look, here's what other people are doing. And that actually carries enormous influence because they don't have other signals around what's happening.
Yeah. Michael, before I try to get to emphasize a point, do we have any other questions typed in from the audience or somebody who wants to come on screen?
Yes. So
Shay,
I think this was
hi.
after. I think this is Diana. I think you asked this question after you asked your original question.
Okay, we'll give her to some of the same price. Okay, what's her second question?
It was how do you suggest that small nonprofits launch a planned giving program? They always think they are too small. No nonprofit is too small.
Yeah. we talked a little bit about it. I would say we're not even going to think about anything but bequests if you're a very small organization.
I love that.
First thing is get it on the website, right? And you can go look at what the Red Cross or United Way does, and you can copy that language and then change, make sure you change the address and the EIN so you're not
Okay.
but it's not that hard. And sort of some of the verbiage that we've already suggested, that type of giving, that type of language is really powerful. And if you yourself commit to 2-3 hours to get smart on planned giving, you can go a long way, especially without diving into some of the more complex giving vehicles. And so, some people, and it's totally fair, but we know folks that have been in the sector for 10, 15, 20 years and never really been wanting to think about it because it's so intimidating. And then they spend a couple hours with us and they're like, oh, well, I should have done this in 1999. It's not that hard. And
Patrick, I'm going to give you a compliment. You can spend a couple hours and the language, rather we say it's not friendly language, the language that's on their free will site is so friendly, easy to digest, positive, non-threatening. I mean, in some ways, you'll have an advantage because I think you're going to be perfectly positioned to message yourself effectively to the donor. I wanted you to come back if our audience doesn't take any point but this one. It's talking about asking not for a cash amount in their estate, but a percentage. How might that play? I'm thinking, I was 25 years, either a major gift officer or in supervising them. And you always wondered how much to ask for. Was it 10,000? Was it 25? Was it 50,000? How do you strategize? Do you ask for 10%, 20%, 25%, 50%?
It depends on the organization. And those of you that are working at religious organizations, mostly Muslim or Christian, end up finding that 10% is a really steady ask for a bunch of
that's tithing, right?
I think we have one Christian partner in Texas, and every gift is 10%. And so it varies by how big the organization is, but it's never more, it's never less. That's a good avenue. I think the 10 to 15% is possible. You might also think, you can start the conversation, well, how many kids do you have? What percentage do you want to leave to the kids? You might think, 35, 40, 45, 50. It's great, well, let's talk about what the remainder is. And you're just sitting there with a napkin doing the math and say, well, it's 30% left. What are the causes that are most important to you? So you can have a conversation like that as well.
And getting back, you pointed out that 70% of adults lack wills. And so for a lot of nonprofits, they could have a lot of board members that don't have wills. Could you talk a little about that?
That's exactly right. So, I think this idea that everyone assumes that everyone else has wills, right? It's just sort of a common thing. Someone else seems responsible, they dress well, you think, well, that person definitely has a will. And the odds are they don't. And so board members are a great place to start. Board members may be in the category of folks that did it, but they did it 15 years ago and they have a new vacation house, or they moved cities, or they sold the car, or they had another grandkid. And so, you might not even want to say, do you have a will, but hey, has the will been updated in 5 years? Because if not, a lot of folks will recommend that you do it. And if you're going to do that, let's talk about including a gift. So,
by the way, I see Diana. Do you have a question or comment you'd like to share?
Not at this time, but thank you.
I'll ask you, what are you drinking?
Coffee.
Okay, that's okay. You could drink something stronger. Fundraisers always ask. But Patrick, I've just gone through in the last 2 years estate planning and myself, and it's a constant game of what if. There are 2 of us and 2 cats. We thought it was pretty simple, but what if you die together? What happens to the cats? We're the youngest siblings. Really, I mean, it is peace of mind. As someone who has had parents pass in the last 10 years, it's so much wiser to have intentions known. And you really ask for problems when you don't have a will.
Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jim, I always like to tell people we all have a will. either the one that we create or the one that the state creates for us.
And hey, that state takes a lot, don't they?
Yes, they do. You don't want theirs, so make your own.
By the way, Marv is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Philanthropic Excellence. I owe him so much. I was doing live workshops before COVID. And then on April 1st, this is the 45th webinar. And between workshops and webinars, he has done 10 with me. So I owe you big time. I forgive him for being a Jets fan, but no one's perfect.
We should all be forgiven being a Jets fan.
Yeah. Let's talk. I want to go back to this, and maybe Marv, you have something to share. And I call it the low-hanging fruit. And what was the number you said? I mean, is it 75% of bequests come unknowingly to the nonprofit, Patrick?
That's 75.
Okay, Marv, I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts? Marv is where I go for advice. How do nonprofits encourage their donors to let them know we put it in there?
I just want to say I think it's wonderful what Patrick and Jenny have created. It's a better mousetrap than we had out there before. Anything we can do to encourage people to take this step and think about us as nonprofits as part of their will and their estate plan is wonderful. So kudos to you for what you've done. The best way to get people to divulge and disclose their intentions are to give them a reason to do that, to create a society, have a belongingness factor that is elevated so that they have a place to go and to join. And when they join, they have to let you know what their plans are. The other thing we always want to do in nonprofits is we like to get people to make their plan giving commitments known to us because we like to turn those deferred gifts into current gifts. If we can begin to have a discussion about what their intentions are, as they get older, they might not need those monies left in accounts in case they need them. And they might release some of those before the gift matures, which is the other joke about plan giving. That's kind of the way we tell people when folks have died and passed on gifts to our organizations. So we don't want them to mature before we have a chance to say thank you. And I think Patrick made that point well earlier.
Didn't we always, where I work, we promised our plan giving donors another 25 years of life expectancy as soon as they let us know about the plan gift.
Absolutely.
Patrick and Marvin, you want to join in? Actually, Congress and the administrations were very kind to charity in 20 and 21. There are a couple of provisions about adjusted gross income. There couldn't be tax-wise a better time to give.
No argument.
Go ahead, Marv.
No argument. You're absolutely right.
I think the other thing, and I keep coming back to the stock market, is that a growth in stock market means there's a lot of capital gains out there to be taxed.
Oh man.
Those become really good opportunities.
Oh man. Hey, do you have any advice, Patrick, on working with financial planners? And I know it shouldn't happen, but a financial planner say, hey, Marv, you should consider leaving some of this for your favorite charity. And they'll say, but who? But any advice on how nonprofits can work with people who are financial advisors?
My sort of first strategy is always around kindness and then go from there. And so I would call the financial advisor and email the financial advisor and say, hi, it's Sarah from the local Humane Society. We often get folks who are thinking about their plans and trying to think about whether or not to leave to charity and are also looking for financial advisors. Can I share your contact information if that ever shows up? And someone will say yes. And then you say, great. And, and so you have it. Here's a little bit more about us in case folks come to you. So if
go ahead.
And just ask folks to be helpful to you, you might as well see if you can help them at the same time and creates a much more symbiotic relationship in a nice way.
Another best practice is having some type of plan giving society. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. Marv was suggesting this, and it's really spot on. Folks that, there are a lot of people who can make big plan gifts, but aren't going to be huge donors otherwise. And so giving them a real source of place to be and recognition, that recognition also builds other gifts, right? Now, that there are 100 people in the Heritage Society or whatever it might be, that's a possibility. One thing I want to note here, by the way, is that a lot of people call it legacy society or heritage society. These words that just sound old and frankly, like center on the idea of mortality. And there's a lot of other options there. Name it after a really charismatic founder or volunteer. Talk about be forward looking, think about creation as opposed to leaving something. You sort of want to think about the words you're using, because legacy society sounds like we're already looking past us, which is can frankly be a little bit insulting to some folks. And instead think about, the creation society, the seed planting society, all these sort of things that are about renewal and not about sort of the end.
Let's talk a little bit about tough love. We really, if you're a nonprofit, you're not going to have as much credibility asking for support in the community if your board and management haven't given, not just annually, but included that nonprofit in their estate plans.
I think that's accurate. And it's something you certainly want to have at least a good portion of folks so you can have singular examples. You don't need to say our whole board or 85% participation. Just say, look, this is Michael, this is what Michael did. And frankly, it also helps, in a world where your board is not just advisorial, but has a give-get commitment that might be sizable. And it's possible that your board is on average considerably wealthier than your donor base, which is certainly the case at some places. You also want to have a couple more examples of folks that are not on the board. That might be a little bit younger, that might not be super well-to-do, at least compared to the board. And you can start sharing those stories so it feels very accessible, as opposed to this thing that's sort of for the erudite elite as well.
I'm wrapping up here. Do we have, Michael, any final questions in the chat space? I got two more for Patrick. Anything in the chat space?
So we got, I've seen a small increase in QCDs, DAF, and stock gifts the last couple years. What are some easy, effective ways I can ramp up that base? And then there was also Marv recommended go to the Institute for Philanthropic Excellence website at www.moremission.com and see the PG program startup white paper in the resources link.
Okay.
This is
Gloria suggested an easy way to launch a planned giving program for a smaller organization especially is just to tell a story, just the way you do about your clients or the folks you're serving. If you tell a story about the impact an unexpected gift had, that can start the conversation in an easy way, because then you are using Patrick's language of creation. So this unexpected bequest fell to me and now I'm able to upgrade all my computers or serve 100 more patients. Or
Gloria, can you take a second to talk about the great nonprofit that you serve?
Thank you. Yes, I am CEO of San Antonio Christian Dental Clinic, which sounds very impressive, but the CEO doesn't have a development officer, so I'm both. And we provide charitable dental care to homeless and low-income adults in San Antonio, Texas, and greater San Antonio. That's what we do. We do about $4.5 million worth of care every year.
Thank you for your service.
Sure.
Okay, Patrick, we're winding up here. So my final question is, there's only one poet in the history of the planet that both recited a poem at the inauguration and recited a poem at the Super Bowl. Who was it?
Amanda Gorman.
That's exactly right. I love her. She's my new hero. And I really love, the title of her poem was The Hill We Climb. And I think that really fits all of us in the nonprofit community. We're climbing a hill, and there's something off base there. Patrick, I like to give our learning community members a guarantee, and that is their chances of getting the gift go way up when they ask. And I imagine the chances of getting a legacy gift and a piece of that $68 trillion is going to go way up the more you ask.
100%. So this is something where it only feels intimidating the first two times, and you guys will be in great shape doing it. And I think thanks Gloria for the amazing work that she was highlighting, but I know a lot of you are doing sort of similarly scales of impact, which is pretty exciting. So
well, Patrick, again, I told him, Marv, the only reason I'm mad, it's amazing what he's accomplished before the age of 40. but I'll forgive you. But I really love what you all at Free Will have done. You have such a friendly website. It's so friendly, even someone like me can digest everything. And let me see if I have it right again. In a couple of years, the Free Will team has had $2.5 billion committed to charities. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, thank you for your service and the leadership for the sector. I have to warn you, when you do such a good job, we're going to ask you back. This has just been a wonderful hour. Thank you. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to put a very short post on LinkedIn and Facebook that's going to summarize Patrick's main points. And then Michael does his magic spin dry, and he does some editing, and then we're going to post a recording and the slides of this program on LinkedIn and Facebook, probably, I don't know, in about 60 to 90 minutes. So I want to thank all the members of our learning community for the work you do every day to touch, improve, and save more lives. And Patrick, I'm now another fan of your Free Will Club. You do fantastic work, and thank you for the wonderful service and leadership you're providing the nonprofit sector.
Jim, it's been really nice to be here and to see everybody.
And everybody stay safe. We'll see you next Wednesday. Okay?
Thank you, Patrick.
Good night. Good night, Diana.
Thank you.
Good night, Gloria. Good night.